Welcome, and this is the 40-something Guy podcast. Hello guys, it's Leo here. Today I'm having a very special guest, as I'm gonna be talking to Dr. James Ruzicka. James is a graduate of Cambridge University and the London Film School. He has written comedy for the BBC, Radio 4, film criticism for Film Exposed website, and a number of feature film screenplays that are currently in development. He produced the award-winning short film Discombobulated in 2005, as well as being the co-writer of the movie Waiting, released in 2015 and currently available on Netflix. As a stand-up comedian, James appeared on the bill at more than 300 live comedy gigs and was seen on BBC Two, ITV and Channel 5. If that alone wasn't enough, James is also a fully qualified medical doctor. James, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Right, so let's start things from the beginning, from the very beginning.
From the beginning?
Yes. So, who's Jimmy Razor?
So I started doing stand-up, this is like about 20 years ago. No, longer than that, actually. I did some stand-up when I was at medical school. And for a while, I was part of a double act. We were called Gag You Like. And that was kind of quite fun. But when you're doing comedy in a double act, you both have to be available for all of the gigs. So it really makes a big impact on your flexibility and on your bookings. So I thought I'll do a few kind of gigs under my own name. And every gig that I booked under my own name, the MC couldn't get my name right. And they would say, the next performer is James. I can't pronounce that. So I thought, I better get some kind of easy to pronounce, easy to remember name. And Razor was close enough to Ruzicka that I thought, it sounds a little bit like me, but it's still a name that everybody can remember. When I started gigging under the name Jimmy Razor, so it was memorable and it was easy to get introduced, but most of the acts that I would meet, when they'd seen my name on the bill before they met me, they'd all say, I was expecting some kind of 6-foot bruiser with a shaven head and knuckle dusters. The name and the act didn't quite marry up.
That's interesting. But tell me, how did you come into comedy? How did that happen?
When I was at university, we did like a bunch of comedy shows. And, I was one of those, kids at school who would enjoy, acting and getting on stage, and then did a bit of acting at university and did a bit of comedy then. And so I did my first 3 years at Cambridge, and then for my final 3 years of medical school, went to London, and there were fewer opportunities there to get up on stage because there's not such a narrow concentration of student shows and student theatres. So to get a bit of performance time, instead it was a question of doing a little bit of live stand-up. And some of the students who'd been a couple of years ahead of me at Cambridge were already in London doing kind of live stand-up. And there were people like Henry Naylor and Sue Perkins who I'd sort of known at Cambridge who were now doing live shows. And I thought, that'll be fun, I'll do a bit of that. And stand-up is it's a bit of a folk industry. Certainly the way it used to work back then was that Time Out, the weekly listings magazine for London, would come out every week. And if you wanted to perform, then you would just phone up the venues and you'd say, any chance of going on for 5 minutes? And you'd build your career in a kind of really lo-fi, low-tech, grassroots kind of way. So back then it was still possible to just book your own gigs. You'd phone up the number in the magazine and go and do it. And it was fun, for a bit. And we were in the double act. But after I qualified as a doctor, there was just never any time to go around and do live gigs because either you were at work or you were on call or you were recovering from being on call and being at work. Yeah. So I gave it a rest for a few years until I kind of finished my anaesthetic exam, and then thought I would take it back up again, just because it's an itch that I still wanted to scratch.
I see. So you kind of build that up from the ground, really, your comedian career.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I would call it a career. Not comedic flash in the pan, yes.
Well,
yeah.
Well, you done hundreds of gigs at the Bill. I
did do hundreds of gigs in the end. It took me kind of some hundreds of gigs to figure out which bit of it I most enjoyed. Mm-hmm. Comedy, it's a young man's game. That and after a while it became a bit tedious driving up and down the country at 2 o'clock in the morning to go and make 40 strangers laugh in Birmingham. And the thing that I enjoyed the most was the writing. I sort of figured out that the writing was the bit that did it for me, and the performing wasn't nearly as compelling. So I ended up, tailing the gigs off and just concentrating on the writing.
I see. And so then explain to me, how does a doctor decide to become a comedian?
I think there is an element of performance in medicine. I don't think they are terribly different.
Perhaps.
A lot of medicine is about communication and, doing what I do. I'm an anaesthetist, and people are often, anxious and worried about, what's going to happen, caring for them through this very brief, stressful part of their life. And I think the performance skills required for that are not a million miles away from the performance skills for, getting up on stage and making strangers laugh. And I think if you ask any anaesthetist, most anaesthetists develop a bit of a patter, and there is an element of performance routine to giving someone anaesthetics. I know that the people that I work with who've done many anaesthetics with me, I've probably learned my patter by now, because I say the same thing to most patients. After a while you figure out what to say and when to say it, and you become quite slick. And then and it becomes a routine.
Yes, that made me remind of episode that I watched on Grey's Anatomy.
Right, I've never watched that show. Is that good?
Oh, come on! Yeah. I think it's great.
I can't watch medical shows.
But once Derek died, then that was it for me. So don't.
Once Derek died.
Yeah, once Derek died, that was it for me.
So I'm not going to watch Grey's Anatomy now, because you've already spoiled it for me.
Yes, of course. Yeah. But there is one of this episode where they opened with this description of surgery, because that's where it basically it goes around surgery. They opened as saying that surgery is like a dance, because there's this routine. So in a way, a performance, and they say about the grace of scrubbing up, if you can say that, and performing on the table, and all the other acts that happens parallel to that, the surgery, perhaps anesthesia, recovery. You know what I mean? So that made me think of that. We, in a way, we all are kind of performers when we come to work.
Yeah. I think you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So looking back at your time as a comedian, what would you have done differently?
The thing I figured out from doing 300 gigs was that I think two big revelations, I think, I'd sort of figured out by the end. The first was that the prize at the end of the road for a comedian, once you see it close up, maybe is not as exciting as it looks from a distance. That I figured out that probably if I kept hammering away, the best I could look forward to is like a slot on a panel show, and maybe doing voiceovers on an advert for Sainsbury's or something. And I realised, well, actually, I'm not sure that was quite as exciting an outcome as I hoped it might be. A lot of comedy is about repetition and hitting your marks and delivering the same performance again and again. One of the great illusions of comedy is giving the audience the impression that you are making it up as you go along. And having seen many acts many times, and once you see enough acts and you see their set enough times, most comedians on the circuit can quote each other's sets and they know what their gags are. So a lot of it is about giving the impression of being spontaneous, and very little of it is about genuinely being spontaneous. So that was kind of a bit disappointing. And the other thing I kind of figured out after doing comedy for a while was that I think the way I explain it to kind of younger performers is that the door doesn't open to the most talented or the cleverest or the wittiest or the best. The door opens to the one who knocks the longest and the hardest. So the way to succeed in comedy, if anyone wants to give it a go, is just to keep hammering away, just keep doing it. Just keep dying and dying and dying, and eventually, eventually the door opens because you just keep pounding away.
No, I mean, good advice.
Good advice.
Good advice. So, looking back at that time, is it fair to say that you don't miss it at all?
Very, very rarely. Sometimes something will happen in the news, and I'll think, "Oh, I wish I had a gig tonight." So I remember when
like when Trump came to power.
Well, yeah, exactly, precisely. I mean, it was I stopped gigging when Bush was in power, and and Bush would still do these kind of crazy, idiotic things. And I think, oh, I wish I had a gig tonight because I could do some great material about that. Trump has kind of negated all of that because Trump does something stand-up worthy, 5 times a day. I've sort of given up reading the news about Trump because it's so depressing.
Oh, it is, absolutely. Let's not go there.
So that's, so rarely there are times when you think, oh, it's something hilarious. I've got some material about that. But yeah, the bit I don't miss is, driving up and down the motorway at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I think I'm guessing that stand-up is a little bit different these days, because stand-up, like everything, has now become a function of social media. The people I know who do well are people who, it's almost like tweeting is more of a gig than performing your gigs now.
Okay.
And if you can develop your followers by being witty online, that kind of trumps building up your grassroots following by performing live. It's just a slightly different beast now, I think. I sound like an old man, don't I? It's internet. Will it catch on? I don't think so.
No, it's all wise.
Light bulbs, candles were good enough for us.
It's just wisdom being spread. That's what it
wisdom.
is. But you're quite right about that. I think I actually know a few comedians that started off online. Like I think Jonathan Pye, he started off
right. Okay. Yeah.
online, Instagram perhaps, or YouTube, one or the other. And there are a few others that I see that has a very strong presence online, so on social media, which I think is great.
I mean, maybe I suppose it's democratizing comedy. Maybe it means you don't need to live in London and go to these London gigs.
Yes.
In order to make a career out of it.
And have access to this.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Thing.
Yeah, to have access to an audience, yeah.
Exactly. Because nowadays we're all connected through the internet anyway, aren't we? Still looking back at that time as a comedian, do you have any funny stories to share with us?
Oh dear. So I mean, there were all sorts of disastrous gigs. I was thinking about this morning, actually, knowing that you were coming around. There was a gig that I did at a pub called the Robert Peel in Kingston, not very far away from where we are now, and it's been kind of booked by a promoter who didn't come to the gig. He just phoned me and another comedians up. Yeah, and he told, just go to the Robert Peel this time on a Thursday night. And we turned up, and half of the week the Robert Peel was a strip club, but it wasn't a strip club on the night that we turned up. But the night we turned up, there were it was obviously some kind of sort of bikers and mods night, because there was like a table of bikers at one side of the venue and a table of skinheads at the other table. And our job was to turn up and tell these guys gags. And all they did was they just kind of frowned and swore at each other all night. And gradually the tension rose and rose and rose until they got to the end of the gig. And never has there been a gig where I and the other acts have left so quickly at the end of the gig. We all ran and got into a van and drove off before it all kicked off. So there was a big fight that we just managed to avoid. So I don't know why the promoter didn't turn up for that one.
God knows why.
Yeah,
God knows.
There was another story which kind of sort of kicks around the internet, where a different comedian used to book a lot of gigs for us, but booked us a gig at the BBC. So we were at this BBC kind of staff venue after hours, and he kind of booked us to do a gig. And the guy who's the promoter had kidney stones. And on the night in question, his kidney stones absolutely killing him, and he had to go on, but he doubled up in pain and kidney stones. And because I was a doctor, I was able to go around the corner so the BBC used to be in White City, and I had lived around the corner. And there's a road called North Pole Road, and there was the North Pole Pharmacy just around the corner from the BBC. So I ran up to the North Pole Pharmacy, and I was able to write a prescription for a suppository. And the guy in the pharmacy, he gave me a handful of rubber gloves at the same time, and he said, "You'll need these."
We'll need that.
And so I ran back to the gig, yes, with this suppository and the rubber gloves, and gave this to the guy who was the promoter and the MC. And 20 minutes later, he was able to go on, and I'd saved the gig. Because I was able to prescribe a suppository. But ever since then, the story went around on the gig that I was the one who'd then given him the suppository so he could go on stage. Which wasn't exactly how it panned out.
Well,
but no publicity is bad publicity. It was good publicity.
There are arguments about that, There are other accounts that say,
otherwise. Don't listen.
But, James, you are not just a comedian, let's say. You're also a script writer. So tell us about projects that you've been involved as a script writer.
So I went to film school about 12 years ago now. So I spent a year at film school, London Film School in Covent Garden, which is run by Mike Leigh, and had a great time doing screenwriting there for a year. On a bunch of projects, and like everything in life, how good you are isn't nearly as important as who you know. So if anybody's thinking about going to film school, I would say go, but don't expect to learn, expect to make contacts. It's about building up your network. So I met an Indian director, Adi Menon, through the film school. And then for years and years after, we wrote like a whole bunch of scripts together. And she wanted to make Indian films with a European sensibility. And we kind of had a similar sense of humour. So we wrote kind of a bunch of comedies and kind of sold a couple of scripts, and it was all kind of fine. And we asked to write other people's scripts, but the first script we wrote together that actually got produced is actually it's like a kind of a tragedy, which is a hospital set drama about a woman whose husband ends up in neuro ITU. And that's the first film that we wrote together that was actually produced. That's the film that's on Netflix now. It's Waiting, and it was that was a lot of fun. And we got to travel with that, and we closed the Indian Film Festival of Los Angeles with that film about 3 years ago. So we kind of got a trip to Los Angeles out of it and got wined and dined, and it was all very nice and it's all very exciting. But that's about as glamorous as it gets. Being a screenwriter, it's much more about sitting in a room and typing. Anybody who writes a film about how glamorous writing is, they haven't done any writing. Because writing is mostly about typing, and you spend a lot of time in coffee shops and you eat little cakes and you type, and that's what it is. So I've done typing on a lot of projects.
Yes.
And some of them would be quite interesting, and there have been kind of other Indian films. I did some scripts for a fantasy television series and for a World War II drama. I've been working on some horror films with Jake West, who's a British horror director, and kind of more comedy. Comedy has always sort of been my first love. So almost any project I write, even if it's the tragedy drama or if it's the horror film, there's always jokes in there. I think any film that doesn't have a joke in it has kind of failed in my book. I think humour is such a fundamental part of human existence. If you don't put a joke in your film, then you don't understand what human nature is. So so I've written a whole bunch of stuff. I've written for television projects as well. Co-wrote a 10-part Indian television series which was out year before last, called Romil and Juggle, which was
interesting.
It was a gay Indian Romeo and Juliet comedy.
So if you could be any more niche than that.
So it was boy meets boy. We originally wrote it as a feature film, and it was bought by some producers who I think were working for MTV India. And they were all kind of saying, this is going to be great. This is going to be very exciting. And not long after they bought it, homosexuality, which had been illegal in India, had then been legalized, and then for about another 200 days, it was then made illegal again.
Oh no!
And they dropped the project, and it was a bit too hot, and eventually the rights came back to us, and we sold it again as a television series. So it has at last been made now.
Is it aired already?
Yeah. So it was aired. So it's Alt Digital, it was Alt Balaji Digital, it was the television company, and they did this quite clever thing where you could watch the first 5 episodes for free on YouTube.
Oh, I see.
And if you wanted to watch the final 5 episodes, then you had to sign up to their channel.
Oh, I see.
So anyone can watch the first 5 episodes for free on YouTube. And it was quite fun, actually. It was good fun.
Unfortunately, it's probably in Hindi, isn't it?
It is in Hindi, yes.
The
version that I watched didn't have subs as well. So although I think you will be able to figure out what happens. The most fun thing about writing these Indian projects is that when we converted the film script into a 10-part television series, you've got to do a lot of development and enrichment, and you bring in more characters, and you need to explore the story, and you've got space to expand and look at different things. And at the beginning of episode 2, we had like a little bit of a narrative gap, and we'd sort of established what the story was, but we were kind of thinking, there's a little bit of a gap here. So at the time, I just wrote, there is a song and dance routine, and that was it. It was just like one little sort of, one sentence.
Yeah.
And then when they came to film it, they wrote a song and they did a 3-minute dance routine.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely fantastic. It was so exciting to watch the tapes back.
Yeah.
And see your one little sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek
Just
sentence.
6 words.
Yeah, exactly. Then become like a scraping routine with 40 dancers and all these young people gyrating. It's great fun.
That's great. So is it fair to say there's death at the end?
Well, there's there is a fake death at the end. So they will fake out death.
Oh, wow.
So these 2 boys, who both come out as gay, and they're rejected by their families, and so they fake their own deaths, and the families,
Oh, yeah.
You're overwhelmed with grief, and they say, "Oh, if only we'd known, we would have loved you all along." And then the boys jump up and they say, "Ah, gotcha!" So they get a second chance. So I mean, it's a comedy. So you got to have you have to have you got a light ending at the end. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. I like that.
So now we've spoiled the ending for Grey's Anatomy and for my TV series as well.
Well, which is in Hindi with possible subs.
Equal opportunity spoilers here. Yes, we're happy to spoil anything.
I may have to put a disclaimer on this before the beginning of this episode, saying spoilers.
Yes.
Right. So, talking about your movies projects still. Waiting.
Yeah.
It's a movie that is a drama rather than a comedy.
It is. It's it's a tragedy, really. It's a film all about death and confronting the inevitable and sad things that you can't do anything about. And the idea is that if you have a relative or a friend who's on intensive care, people are hooked up to all these machines, and it's almost like a factory environment. And you go along, and there's sort of nothing for you to do. So you end up kind of sitting by the bed and waiting in the waiting room, and your life is suspended while you wait to see what the outcome is going to be. And so we kind of wanted to do a film about that suspension, about when you're in emotional turmoil and yet you have no opportunity to vent and nothing to do while it's all happening. Inevitably, even with waiting, we ended up writing loads of jokes. So there are lots of jokes and lots of funny bits. And when it came to marketing it, the film company ended up marketing it kind of as a comedy, and they put lots of gags in the trailer and kind of went for the comedy angle. Mm-hmm. With any film that you write, one of the most nerve-wracking moments is when you watch it in front of an audience. Now, when we went to Los Angeles, and it was screened in this absolutely massive cinema, it must have been 1,500 seats or 2,000 seats, absolutely enormous.
Wow.
And it was completely packed. And you get so nervous thinking, oh, blimey, 2,000 people are going to watch this now. I hope they laugh at the funny bits. And thankfully, generally people laughed at the funny bits and didn't laugh at the sad bits. But there are a few things more nerve-wracking than writing a gag and then wondering, am I the only person who thinks this is funny? Maybe there's going to be 2,000 people here, but 199 of them won't crack a smile. It's only me chuckling away in my own little seat at the front in the bottom left-hand corner.
At my own jokes.
Yes. I'm to laugh really loud to make up for all the other people not laughing. So it's tragic comedy, that's a thing, isn't it? Tragic comedy.
It's kind of it is. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
So it's a comedy with funny bits, and they ended up marketing it mostly as a comedy.
Yeah, because that's the approach I get from people from whatever I looked into that.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
It's more of a comedy than perhaps the drama, the tragedy.
Yeah. Exactly.
But there are aspects of all of it in it.
Yeah.
So, but it is a very good movie, and regardless,
thank you very much.
I enjoyed it a lot.
Right, you're very kind. Thank you.
And but talking about movies, and before Waiting, which is perhaps your biggest to date.
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah.
You did short films.
We did. Yeah.
So tell me about a bit about those.
So after I've been doing stand-up for a while, and I figured out that I would prefer to write rather than perform, I thought I would try and sort of flex my muscles or train on some short films. And this is the time, this is a pre-smartphone era, but it was time when you could go and buy a digital video camera and make a film with your friends fairly cheaply. This is pre-YouTube as well, actually. I think. Yeah, this is a long time ago.
Do I have remembered that too?
Well, it's funny how this is a kind of it's a period of history that's now shrouded in mystery, isn't it? Really, things that happened pre-YouTube or pre-Facebook, you're struggling to look for evidence. It's almost like they didn't really happen.
Well, it's funny
because there aren't 5,000 photographs of it online. Did this really happen at all?
Yeah, I looked. For instance, I was looking for stuff on Jimmy Razor, and I looked high and low, on the internet, even going into the dark web. I couldn't find a single
Silk
gig.
Road, that's where you want to look. Yeah, that's right.
I couldn't find a single gig of you online because it's YouTube, internet, all that. All the things that we have around us nowadays.
Yeah, there's a lot of that stuff. So yeah, if it exists anywhere, it's on like a VHS tape somewhere in my attic, isn't it? That's the only place where it will exist.
We're gonna have to get a hold of those tapes.
I think we should be glad that the VHS player doesn't work anymore. So, yeah, it's lost forever now, purely archival. So back then, if you made a short film on digital video, it was difficult to show it to anybody. And I remember, trawling around the short film festivals. There are a few festivals that would show, anything. So there was a film festival called the Portobello Film Festival, and they would show anything you sent them. And so it went on for like sort of 5 days in West London, and they would have these venues all over the place, and they would they would screen films by having a TV on in the background in a cafe somewhere in West London, and they'd say, "Oh, you've got a screening 4:00 in the afternoon at Jeff's coffee shop," and you could put that on your CV. "Oh yes, I had a screening at the Portobello Film Festival."
Oh wow.
But otherwise, there were sort of some international film festivals and some London film festivals and some national film festivals. And we went out to kind of Wales and was it Margate or Ramsgate or something like that? We sort of make these little films and take them out there and show them in front of an audience. At least back then, if your short film failed, there weren't really very many witnesses to talk about it. Whereas these days, if you make a terribly embarrassing film and put it on YouTube, it's there forever, isn't it? It's unavoidable.
It is.
So maybe we should be glad of the pre-digital age, the pre-internet age. At least your mistakes were easier to bury back then.
Yes, absolutely.
So we did like a bunch of short films. Trying to think of the ones that were most successful. We did a silent film about a man trying to get to work as quickly as possible, which was called Driven, where he didn't actually drive at all, and he would kind of run from bus to overground to tube, and we filmed this thing completely illegally on like the London Underground and in the streets without any permits, and that was kind of was quite fun.
What about Discombobulated?
Oh yeah, so that was a film we filmed that in the British Council offices in Trafalgar Square.
What is that about?
Which is and that was a film with a comedian called Mitchell Anderson, Scottish comedian. And that may possibly be on YouTube, actually. I think we might have uploaded that to YouTube. I don't know whether it's still there or not. It's about this guy who works at an office, and he's in love with the woman who's like 3 desks away, but can't pluck up the courage to ask her out. And in his mind, he plays through all these different scenarios where he goes to her desk and asks her out, and he imagines every possible way that it could go wrong. And so that was we won an award for best British and Irish short film for that film. Actually. Yeah, so that kind of did okay. Actually, it was so that was fun. That was kind of a springboard to get me into film school. Actually, Discombobulated. So yeah, it was like a short 6-minute film about how hard it is to ask a girl out. And I think the guy who was the guy who gave us the award, I think he was like the chairman of the judges, was saying that it very accurately represented his own experience of asking girls out. So I think that's the main reason why. Yes. The main reason why we won is because the guy who was head of the judges had a very unsuccessful love life, and we touched a chord with him.
Perhaps he had a lot of imagining.
Yes, he was a proto-incel, I think, and we moved him.
So James, you are comedian, script writer,
right,
and a doctor, but that's not all. That is not
all. There's more.
There's more. You're also a musician.
Oh well, hardly. I mean, I suppose so.
Tell us about your music.
I'm a musician only insofar as I like to kind of noodle away. So I did make an ambient electronic album. This is about 10 years ago or so. So I played piano when I was a kid, and I was in a band in Nottingham when I was growing up for a while. It was a band called 12 Angry Men, and there were 5 of us. And
yes, and why not 5 angry men? It has to be 12.
It had to be 12 angry men. And there was a rule that in any publicity photograph we all had to be smiling. So 12 angry men. They were a reasonably successful local band in Nottingham in the sort of early 90s. And they had a keyboard player for a while, and then the keyboard player left, and I was a school friend of the bass player who said, "Oh, we need someone to come and do keyboards." So I was in the band for literally about 5 minutes.
Until the truth came out and you couldn't play anything.
Exactly. It was only after I gigged with them they realised they didn't need a keyboard player at all. So I was instrumental in the band going from a 5-piece to a 4-piece. So did a little bit of gigging with them, and then and these days it's a little bit like the democratization of filmmaking with the internet, or the democratization of broadcast radio with podcasting. There's been a democratization of music now. So anybody who's got a laptop has got a music studio that's more sophisticated than the Beatles used to record.
Or a podcast channel.
Well, yes, but I mean, yeah, exactly. This is the gift of technology, isn't it? So now, where previously the only people who would have access to a 24-track recorder would be, Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
You would spend, a £500,000 recording an album. Now anybody with a clapped-out laptop can do the same.
True.
So I've always kind of doodled about with a bit of music, and it's nice to be able to have a bit of expression that way. So so I recorded an ambient album sort of many years ago, which is now on Bandcamp and has been there for a long time under the name Number Theory. And occasionally put out a few tunes, and it keeps you sane, doesn't it?
It does.
Keeps you sane.
After talking to James about his career as a comedian, as a scriptwriter, and a musician even, we went on to talk about career choices, following your passion, and the things that brings you fulfillment in life. So, James, what fulfills you the most? The pathway of a doctor or the gags of a comedian?
It's good to have both, I think. That's a cop-out answer, isn't it? I like. It's nice to have both. I think if I had the opportunity to give up one and stick with the other, it would have to be a great offer, because I enjoy doing medicine, and it gives you that warm glow feeling like I've made a proper difference to somebody's life, and it's something which has got genuine social value, but I don't have to do it so much that I'm there 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and I haven't got time to do the other stuff in my life. So I'm the luckiest person I know, I think, because I get to split my time between both. And I think, each one feeds into the other, each one complements the other. I'm not going to give up one or the other. I'm going to say both. Is that all right?
Yeah, a bit, I guess so.
That's a non-answer, isn't it?
In that sense, how do you see yourself as being the most accurate version of yourself then?
It's a good question. I wonder what does that mean, the most accurate version of yourself? It's okay to be both, isn't it? I think everybody, we've all got versions of ourselves which are true. The you that hangs out with your kids, and then the you that goes out on date night with your wife, and then the you that goes to work, or the you that does the podcast, or whatever. They're all you, aren't they? None of them are pretending to be you. They're all you, and they're all different bits of you.
Different
I don't know,
sides
good question.
Different sides of the same coin.
Yeah,
perhaps.
exactly.
Oh, that's interesting. So, in that sense, working as a doctor or healthcare professional, it's intense, and if you're not careful, it can take quite a big chunk of one's life, right?
Yeah.
So how do you find the balance between, in your case, as being a doctor and doing the other stuff that you do?
A lot of it's to do with the specialty, I think. So being an anaesthetist much more facilitates doing other things with your life than many other medical specialties. When you're an anaesthetist, you look after somebody very intensely, for a few hours, and then you smile and you wave them goodbye, and they don't need you anymore. And sometimes your patients come back, and we're always interested in finding out what happens, but it's not a question that you're going to see. It's rarely a question that you're seeing the same person day after day, and observing how their care evolves and how their needs change. So when you're an anaesthetist, you can work part-time and be just as effective as if you're full-time. Whereas there are other specialties in medicine. If you're a surgeon and you're going to do an operation, well, you want to see the patient the day after because you want to see how the operation went, and you want to see them 2 days after that because they're still getting better, and you want to see them a week and a month and 6 months later. Whereas for an anaesthetist, our care is very intense but time limited. So you can give it all your attention for a few hours, and then then forget about it completely. And it doesn't mean you haven't done your job properly.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Because that's the situation we find ourselves every day at work.
Yeah.
But and it is just as important. But in talking about what is important, do you think it is important to have other interests in life other than just work?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of envy the people who have a life which is all work. Sometimes I think
why?
I look at people like that and I think, well, you found the thing that you love and you're getting paid to do it and you want to do it all the time. I remember when I was a boy visiting my uncle who had a friend who was an engineer, and he used to say that engineering was so great and he loved it so much he would happily pay someone else to let him do it. He thought it was just so fascinating and wonderful.
Wow.
That's a great situation to be in. So the people who have got that, I envy you. Well done. Hats off to you. But if you can't, find that kind of level of single-mindedness in your life, then you owe it to yourself to spread yourself out a bit, don't you? I did 6 months of medical oncology not long after qualifying as a doctor, and so I was working at Charing Cross, and we would get patients who just been recently given this diagnosis of cancer, and they'd been told, you've got this terrible disease, and then we would give them radiotherapy, and we would give them chemotherapy, and they'd feel blooming awful for the time that they were with us, and it was all pretty dismal. And one of my roles as doctor on the ward really was just to sort of chat to the patients and see how they were doing and help them to get through this awful experience. And so I had a lot of talks with people who were facing the end of their lives or worried about dying, and who were reflecting on what they'd done and what they'd achieved and what they wished they'd done. And you got to observe a lot of people who are in the end stages of their lives and see what they wanted to do with those last few weeks or days. And none of those patients ever told me, oh, you know what, I wish I'd spent more time at work. but you would see patterns emerge, and they would say, I wish I'd spent more time with my family, or I wish I'd done this, or I wish we'd gone to Nepal like we planned to, I wish I'd gone to visit my aunt in California, or people have regrets. And I think when you're in a position to meet people who've got these regrets, then listen to the lessons and take it on board, because you've got a little preview of the time in your own life when you're going to be coming to the end, and look back, and if you can anticipate the regrets and try and avoid them early on, well done. Listen to the lessons. So I think that's one of the most useful things any medical practitioner can take away from their practice. There's a lot of wisdom to be gained here from talking to people who are in a different place in their lives. So take the opportunity to gain the wisdom.
Absolutely. And in this job that we do, one of the things I love the most is exactly talking to the elderly, because you can learn so much from them, and at a moment where they are a bit vulnerable, but it's still open to share their experiences and just talk, because a lot of them are just lonely. And when they come to us to have a surgery or to being cared for in any degree and form, for them it's a bit of interaction with other people. So I'm always open to talk to those people and learn from them. So on that note, and you pursue the career as a comedian, you're doing your script writing, obviously you also still working as a doctor. So what would be your advice for anybody who wants to pursue a passion, but by thinking, this is just ludicrous, I will never make it?
I would say, first of all, don't think about making it or not. Enjoy the process and not the end result. It's like nobody turned up at the first day of film school and they were asked, why do you want to make films? Nobody said, because I want to buy a yacht and I figured that this is the best way to get one. Any kind of creative pursuit, very unlikely to make very much money out of it. So if you're going into it to make money, you're almost certainly going to be disappointed. And I know plenty of people who want to be writers but find writing painful and difficult and challenging. And I think, well, that's pointless then. So why are you doing it? That's the part. That's what it is.
There's the wrong job for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's the wrong thing to do then. It's like people want to be a writer but don't actually want to do any writing. Whereas if you want to be a writer, you've got to enjoy the process of sitting down and typing, because that's what it is. That's what the job is. So think not about results. Think about process. Enjoy the process. And then if you do enjoy the process and it's what you want to do, the only other advice I would give is try and do it every day if you can.
Yeah.
I think you'll learn much more and make more progress and take more pleasure from it if you're doing a bit every day, rather than if you're sort of punishing yourself about not achieving anything every day and then trying to blitz it on a weekend once every 2 months. I would say if you want to be a writer, write even if it's just a few words every day. Write a few sentences every day and try and get a bit in every day. It's like going to the gym, isn't it? That if you want to make yourself fitter, do a bit of exercise every day rather than sitting on the chair for 2 months and then running a marathon one day in the end of April and then doing no more exercise for 12 years. I mean, it's not. It's doing a bit every day. It's what I'd recommend. Enjoy the process. Do it.
Yeah, that's great, because it makes me think about this podcast, because I've been thinking about this podcast for so long,
right?
And I wanted to put something together, and obviously I'm not doing this for the purposes of money. It's more of the process of actually talking to interesting people like yourself and others.
Oh dear, no pressure.
But also bringing something that didn't exist before,
Right? Yeah,
something that didn't exist before, and that I enjoy. I think that's the most thing. You have to enjoy whatever you're doing, isn't it? Because if you don't enjoy it, there's no point in starting anything.
Yeah.
And then if money happens as a consequence, fine. But if it doesn't, at least you still enjoy what you're doing.
Absolutely.
So, reflecting on all that, would you go back to comedy?
I had an email from a friend that I used to gig with. This is just like yesterday, the day before yesterday, saying that he's organising some gigs.
You heard it here before, folks.
He's organising some gigs, and so he said, "Oh, I'll put you down for one. What do you think? Do you want to?" And I did. I did a charity gig for him, like my first live performance for 13, 14 years, last January. For him, where I did one song live and had a bit of a chat with the audience, and it was, it wasn't absolutely horrendous, and it was all right. So I wouldn't utterly dismiss the idea of going back to doing a bit of live performance if I could enjoy it. I've got young children, so a bit like you, that my children aren't quite as young these days, but they still need a bit of attention.
True.
So that tends to put the brakes on things that you might do with your evening, but it won't be very long before my children probably won't really want to speak to their dad most evenings. and they'll be perfectly happy when I get out of the house and get out of their hair. When I was gigging, there used to be a comedian called Norby West, who was, he was in his mid-70s, I think. And he was kind of going around doing the same gigs that I was at sort of age 29. And he was a kind of a lovely guy, and he was doing it just because he really enjoyed it. And he had all sorts of great material about being old. And he was a big favourite with all the young performers. So there are a whole bunch of performers who are 50 years younger than Norby, but they would all fawn over him and buy him drinks and listen to his stories. So maybe that's the guy I'll be. I'll try and be Norby West. I'll wait until I'm in my mid-70s, start booking gigs again. That'll be good. I'll have material by then.
I'm sure you have plenty of stuff to say. So then it's fair to say that Jimmy Razor is not dead.
He's not dead. He's sleeping.
He's sleeping, maybe just slightly comatized.
Yes. He's in a propofol stupor, but
Okay.
one day may re-emerge.
So I have a request.
Oh, yes.
Can we get Jimmy out of his coma and get him to tell us a joke?
Reviving
him.
You did warn me that you would ask me to tell a joke, so I was thinking, oh, blimey, I better. So what I did, this isn't so much a joke. This is a story that I used to tell commonly on the stage. So I used to MC a lot of gigs.
Okay.
Where you don't really quite get to do your 10 or 20 minute set. Instead, you introduce the other acts, but you do a couple of minutes of material between each act. So you kind of just try to keep the audience warm, and you big up the other performers, and then bring them on stage. And so often there was a story that I used to tell when I was MCing, which was just like a story about when I was younger. So I grew up in Nottingham and only moved to London when I was in my sort of early 20s. And I remember one day going back to visit my mum in Nottingham, and she said, "Oh, you come visit my friend who works in the bank." So I went with my mum to like the local NatWest where she used to do her banking. We met her friend who worked there, and he was saying to me, he said, "Oh, you live in London, do you?" And I was saying, "Yeah, I do." And he was saying, "Oh, I could never live in London." He said, "This is a true story, absolutely true. This is word for word what he said. He said I could never live in London." He was saying, "I only ever went there once, and it was really crowded and hectic. And when I got home, I was exhausted." And I said, "Oh, all right. Well, when did you go to London?" And he said, "This is absolutely true." He said, "I ran the London Marathon." So most of my jokes would be like ridiculous made-up stuff, but that, I swear, it's absolutely true. It's what he said. Sometimes, the best material just comes and finds you, doesn't it?
Of course, it was. Mine. Was he the bank manager? He said
he was like kind of mortgages manager or something like that. He had like a responsible position in NatWest.
My God, never did any more marathon again in his life.
I'm not doing that.
I think that was that. I think that was that.
There.
The horrible people running around me and some other cheering. That was the worst bit. All right, James. I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very much for.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you
coming to the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure I wish you all the best in your future project.
Yes, good luck with the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm sure you'll be a blast after this. But thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Cheers, mate.
See you soon.
Bye. And that's it for now. Talking to James was an absolute pleasure, and I hope you guys had as much fun listening to it as I had talking to him. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can follow me on Instagram at the 4040 something _guy podcast. Alternatively, you can visit my website at www.the4040something_guy podcast.libsyn.com, where you'll find more content and the show notes and ways to contact me on there too. See you on the next episode, but before I go, I have a surprise for you guys. Shall we listen to one of your? Shall we listen to one of your tracks?
Yeah, we'll listen to a brief extract.
Ah, lovely. Here it comes. James Ruzicka on keyboard, on piano. Is it
piano and effects? Yeah, piano and effects.
So James Ruzicka on piano and effects for the first time ever at the 40 something guy with the track Snow Glimmers.